Good evening. I wish to talk to you this evening about the state of the nation's affairs, and the picture I have to paint is not, unfortunately, a very cheerful one. The figures which are just now becoming available to us show one thing very clearly. As a community, we are living way beyond our means. I don't mean that everyone in the community is living too well. Clearly many are not, and have barely enough to get by. But taking us all together, we have been living at a rate which is simply not justified by the amount of goods and services we are producing. To make up the difference, we have been borrowing enormous amounts of money, borrowing at a rate which just cannot continue. A few simple figures will make this very clear. At home, the government's current income from taxes and all other sources in 1979 fell short of what was needed to pay the running costs of the state by about £520 million. To meet this and our capital programme, we had to borrow in 1979 over £1,000 million. That amount is
Corruption was endemic in Ireland throughout the 1960s and 70s. With the new business and development landscape and culture that had opened up, a network of executives, developers, and politicians were using the state to further their own interests. This came to a head with the exposure of one of Ireland's most notoriously corrupt figures, Charles Haughey, who, by now riding his wave of power and dominance within Fianna Fáil and government, had become connected, powerful, and wealthy. While the ordinary Irish struggled and strived during these times, Haughey famously told the nation they had to tighten their belts, while he and his ilk were wearing the finest of suits and dining in the finest of restaurants. Haughey was finally exposed with the Ansbacher tax scam. In 1969, one of Haughey's personal accountants, Des Traynor, began to mastermind an elaborate tax scam, benefiting in all 179 of Ireland's elite, with a bank in the Cayman Islands. He began in 1971 to set up the Guinness Mahon Cayman Trust. This allowed him to take money from his clients to avoid tax, when really resting in accounts he managed from his office on Stephen's Green, made to look like they were offshore, but really not. This kept their money at hand they could write off interest for, while supposedly paying abroad as an extra deduction against their taxes. Despite covering his tracks to protect client identities, by developing a system of memorandum accounts to track who owned what assets, alongside a system of anonymity codes. In 1976, the Irish Central Bank accountants, on a routine inspection, discovered loans backed by offshore accounts and concluded it to be a tax deduction scam. But amazingly, instead of ordering Traynor close them down, accepted his word he would cease operations, and decided to label the case as avoidance and not evasion. Corruption on the matter wasn't too far away. Director of the central bank at the time, Ken O'Reilly, a major funder of Fianna Fáil, was also one of the account holders. Fearing exposure, blocked the central bank from taking any action in having the accounts shut down, or information being passed on to the tax office. The scam continued for 25 years, only again coming to light in 1997, when payments from the late Irish business giant Ben Dunne to Charles Haughey and former Fine Gael minister Michael Lowry led investigations to be made, of which nearly 200 accounts were discovered, many of which were the inner circles who bankrolled Fianna Fáil.
Former Taoiseach Charles Haughey is to testify before the Dunn's Payments to Politicians Tribunal, his legal team said today. Counsel for Mr Haughey accepted as a matter of probability that £1.3 million was paid into accounts controlled by accountant Des Traynor for Mr Haughey, but said Mr Haughey did not know that this money came from Ben Dunn. Earlier, counsel for the tribunal outlined evidence which is to be presented, which they believe proves that Mr Haughey obtained the use and benefit of the money at the centre of the investigation.
For the first time in modern Irish history, this exposed more than showing the general public that their country was a two-tiered society. It showed what a disgrace its leaders in business and politics were to be, capable of being the lowest of the low. Haughey, in the space of his career, overall took £45 million in bribes and other corrupt payments from business associates and friends, in return for favours and access to government resources. He lived in a mansion in Kinseely, Dublin, owned a yacht, stud farm and even his own private island, while ordinary Irish people drudged under his government policies. Despite his legacy of corruption and cronyism, the toxic culture he nurtured and cultivated between he and his ilk, as Ireland to be a commodity used as they saw fit at the detriment to its people, was to be his lasting legacy. Fianna Fáil have long abandoned the care and passion for Ireland its founders had in those first decades of the Free State. Since his passing, generations of the party have kept the Haughey philosophy and memory alive, cultivating inner circles, as well as foreign political, financial and economic powers. A final mark Haughey was to make on the country, arguably worst of all, was helping establish the Irish Financial Services Centre in Dublin, commonly known as the IFSC, in 1987. This institution in time would spawn a legacy of corruption and cronyism so vast, if Haughey was alive today, would perhaps make him blush with shame or pride, as it has since become the tax haven nerve centre of Ireland, and one of the most lucrative tax havens in the world.